All right, over to you,
Awesome.
Vincent and Tim.
So thanks, Ian. Welcome everyone to the dual use month or quarterly, bi-weekly, bi-monthly meeting that we have. It's a group of individuals and companies that are working together as one to help develop our technology market to fit both government and military uses and applications. I'm Tim Gillespie. I'm the host this session, and I'm from AWS, Amazon Web Services. And what I will ask today, normally we go around the loop because there's only 20 to 25 of us and do introductions and tell everybody what we're doing. Well, today, because of the numbers and the excitement we have with having Olin on with us, we want to make sure we give him as much time as possible. I'd ask that everybody put their contact information introductory, just like I have in the chat, so that we can reach out if we need to or want to, and can increase those communication linkages. With that, I'm going to introduce Vincent from the University of Hawaii, who's going to introduce Olin and has some announcements on upcoming activities for everybody to be aware of.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Vincent Kimura. I'm with the University of Hawaii's Office of Innovation and Commercialization, underneath Vice President Vasilis Sermos in the Office of Research and Innovation. So I'm really excited to launch this new program, which is a part of OIC's vision and mission in terms of really bridging the gap and supporting our faculty, staff, students, and alumni. And this program is called Ideation Studio. It's a 12 to 24 month program. The idea for this particular talk story, we can call it, of Confessions of a Serial Entrepreneur, has been a huge hit so far, and so very thankful for Olin to share his mana'o. Real quick, we do have some updates and some kind of upcoming events. A part of this series is other talk stories. We've got a couple panels on funding and financing. We do have a continuation of the Confessions of a Serial Entrepreneur end of August. And it's really fascinating because in thinking about one of the biggest challenges of a startup really comes down to who you bring on your team. So Olin will be talking a little about that too. And then we finish up with Martin Zorn, who's president of Kamakura. A couple other really interesting kind of updates just to keep on your radar. Our Ideation Studio Incubator is launching our cohort 2, which will start in a couple months. So if you have an idea, if you know someone, please do share that with them and reach out to us. Something else too, our partners, Ensign, the National Security Innovation Network, is also launching a number of other programs, hackathons, entrepreneurship training, and acceleration. So if you're interested, please do research that. Something come up very soon, which is tomorrow, is the Design Thinking Bootcamp. It's 11th annual bootcamp. Cost for teachers and students is nothing. Everyone else is $265. You can go to Eventbrite and search for Design Thinking Hawaii. In addition, next month, our partners AWS, True, et cetera, are doing a Hawaii Cloud Innovation Summit, July 20th at the Convention Center. You can also find the registration information on Eventbrite. And then wrapping it up, end of October, we've got HTDC's annual conference, as well as our office, OVPRI's annual conference too. So I will share this information in the end. But without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce Olin Lagoon. And let me put a spotlight on him right there. Hey, Olin.
All right, how's it?
Hey. Well, again, I really appreciate you joining us. And, one of the things that we really wanted to talk about is this idea of sharing. And, I want to give you the full 30 minutes of really kind of diving deep into some of the things that you learned over the decades of being an entrepreneur. So I'm going to ask you this real softball question. Who is Olin Lagon? Tell me about your early entrepreneurial, starts. What did that look like?
Softball. Hey, hello everybody. Yeah, thanks for tuning in. I think as far back as I can remember, everything I did had some kind of commerce component to it. So I think I was telling you that the first thing I did was, I think it's 4th or 5th grade. I saw a tattoo and I wanted to figure out how it was done. So I went to the library, figured it out, and started tattooing the kids in my neighborhood in KPT. So big Samoan kids, much bigger than me, charging them 25 cents a letter, not knowing about impermanence. But I think so I guess that's who I am. Like everything I do, I look at creativity, I look at economy and stuff like that.
And from those Hanabata days, you kind of told me and shared that a lot of the ahas, the passion for learning really came from, this drive of going to the library every day and seeing how things work. And then, came to this 5th grade component too. Tell me about Dave.
Dave was my, I had a big brother, big sister. My dad passed away when I was young, so my mom got me a big brother, big sister, and he changed my life with this really small thing. So he had called me one day, like, this is my big brother, big sister dude, and my mom handed me the phone, and he was like, hey, can you hear it? Can you hear it? And I couldn't hear it, and he was like begging me, listen, don't breathe, listen. And so I didn't hear it, but he was telling me that he was in Kaimuki at the time, and it was hailing, and I couldn't believe it. And so I remember hanging up the phone, and like, I didn't realize it hailed in Hawaii. But the point that this grown-ass man called me, like, he didn't have to, but he called me, like, he saw me and he knew that I was interested in stuff like that. And like, when people do that, they really change your lives. That was one really pivotal moment for me. Small kid time. So I appreciate you, Dave.
Wherever you are in the metaverse. Okay, so as we build through this, past the Hanabata days and a lot of the initial inklings of who you eventually become as an entrepreneur, a serial entrepreneur, nonetheless, what happened after kind of growing up? Tell me about, like, when you're 17, trying to go through stuff.
Yeah, I think the reason why I chose social entrepreneurship, all of my companies have some social good to it, is like growing up in public housing, KPT. Like, one time I got stabbed. I was playing by myself, drawing on the chalk, drawing with some chalk, and some kid came up behind me and stabbed me. And I went home completely bloodied. And my mom was so distraught that she didn't call 911. She called her pastor to take me to the hospital because she too needed care, right? So like, those are the kinds of things that I grew up seeing, and it completely changed my worldview. And so everything I've done as a young adult has really been, can I start something that is good business, but also good for the community? And so I think 17, 18, when I first started creating like real companies, it was always rooted in something like that.
Yeah. But tell me, you actually, after graduating or not graduating high school, correct?
Yeah. I have Asperger's, so I have a really difficult time like focusing on things. So I wanted to surf every day. So I didn't finish high school traditionally. And so I when I was ready, then I started at the community college, and then finished there, and then went on to UH. But yeah, that was my path.
But when you got to UH, you tell me about some of those stories you had there, because that felt like a pretty transitional component of who you eventually became.
Yeah, I'm grateful to UH because people don't always have the same experience that I did, but I found it to be incredibly flexible. Like, I wanted engineering, but not one of those typical engineering degrees. And so I didn't know what I wanted. So talked to the dean and figured it out. I got my like general degree where I could like pick whatever. And then I did my regular degree. And so I ended up like just having this fantastic time at UH. I ended up going to 8 different countries during the summers to study. Became a fellow at the East-West Center as an undergrad, so even flexibility there. So I found just a ton of academic freedom and the ability to kind of like figure some things out at UH. I actually started my first tech company while I was a senior at UH.
What was that?
So that company is called WorldPoint, and so we grew that to a pretty good-sized international company. So I had about 100 employees here in Hawaii, and the idea was to I built some technology that allowed for the management of content in different languages. And then we employed about 5,000 translators around the world to do the work. And so it's always in-country work. So we were providing direct payments to people that would typically get paid just a fraction of their labor's worth. And so we kind of disrupted that model. and ended up delivering that service to, I mean, it was a pretty huge list of companies: Disney, Nike, Kodak, the Olympics, MIT. So there's a huge list of companies that use that service over the years. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy to think that you guys were taking over the top 2 floors of the old First One Bank building. I mean, that's
Yeah, we didn't quite match because it showed. You don't see my shorts, but we had shorts on and shirts. Yeah, we did not look like the others that were like downtown typically, but you know, engineers are a little different breed.
I'd love for you to share some of that early kind of WorldPoint stuff, because I feel like it's a pivotal component, especially for a lot of the students and folks in Hawaii. You know, you were pretty young. You were just trying to figure it out. You started it based on, you know, someone reaching out to you, a surgeon, and I think it was Larry. Is that what it was?
Yeah, Larry Cross, he just sold Hawaii Online. So he was the dean at the James program out at Hawaii Kai. And so they reached out to me and said they had this idea. They needed a techie to help kind of get it off the ground. I was going to go to law school, so I was heading to law school, but I thought, you know, I can pause for a little bit and get this off the ground, but then quickly learned that we have to pivot. And, you know, we started landing a bunch of clients, and like most entrepreneurships, you have to like look at where you need to go and listen to your clients. And so we quickly pivoted and ended on this role where we deliver these services to, you know, I think world-class services. You know, we were doing all the translations for the Olympics, for example, here in Hawaii. And so that was pretty cool to see that, you know, we were able to deliver on some of those early successes.
And not to blow the fact that WorldPoint was doing some, you know, the very, very early stage e-commerce website too, with crazy shirts and
96.
Sears.
Yeah, we took we had put Sears online with first to bring Sears. We did e-commerce transactions internationally in 96. And so, yeah, it was kind of a hack. I had to like literally like connect computers to the banks over modems. And yeah, it wasn't pretty, but it is what we needed to do to get it to work.
And your role was chief architect, correct?
Yeah, so I've always been the technical person at most of these companies. So sometimes CEO, but I like the technical role a little bit better.
So one of the things that it's funny, how I first heard of Olin Lagon is because one of our mutual, actually some of the employees you had, Jonah and Nick, were telling me stories about this guy, this crazy CEO who would get up and do presentations and do magic tricks. I'm like, what? Tell me why you did magic tricks.
Yeah, I'm not a serious guy. So I got recruited by like some of the world's largest tech companies. So they flew me around the world to present at these like conferences, Internet Worlds and things like that. We had won a bunch of competitions, like just I pitch and I have fun with it. And so I noticed a lot of folks, like they're really serious on how they present and pitch. And so I thought, I got to be really different. So every presentation I do, I really share something like radically different or off the wall, unrelated. And I think it's cool. I just pitched in Europe last week in Lisbon. So our company was selected by Amazon as one of their latest cohorts for clean energy. And so I got up there and I shared about some shampoo bottles that we've been refilling for the last 30 years. And it's really nothing to do with the presentation, but people loved it and they come after. So that's sort of my style.
I'll jump back to the AWS later on, but I wanted to kind of wrap up some of the stuff around WorldPoint in particular, because that was your first go as being I would say a fairly sizable Hawaii-based startup. And, you know, you shared with me, you know, the revenue components of that. You acquired a company in Switzerland or something like that. Yeah,
we did. Yeah, we grew pretty quickly, and you know, we were caught up with the .com era too. So I left to join the Peace Corps. So I transitioned. It took me about a year to transition out, and I left at the peak of the company. So we were like on top of the world and doing great. And yeah, it was definitely an interesting perspective of growth. So you got to know when to leave the companies that you start as well too. So not just like, you know, stay for the sake of staying. So sometimes it's healthy for you to transition.
Yeah. Well, you know, while you're at the peak there and leaving, you know, one of the things about most or all startups is the trials and tribulations, you know, the ups and downs. And we talk about that a lot, especially as seasonal entrepreneurs. It's really about taking care of your mental health too. And I wanted to mention too, just because WorldPoint had so many big clients, Nike, Disney, Olympics, et cetera. tell me about that time, that decision where, as you said, you burned out, you wanted to transition out. What was that like?
Yeah, so I was traveling about 50% of the time. So that's pretty brutal. I remember I did a day trip to London from Hawaii. Like went there and they bought some of our tech and did what I needed to do, and I came back because I had some other things to do. And so when I was 20 something, I could do that. I can't do that now. But I remember just like I was at the point where I felt like, yeah, this is really killing me, like just in terms of the hours and stuff. And I can see us transitioning to someone that's more talented than me and has more experience. And I'm still pretty young. And so I identified that person, spent about 8 months sort of grooming that next person to take over that chief architect position, and then transitioned out. So it was the right time on many fronts. It wasn't just my own decision, but I felt it was the right decision for the company.
Mm. Unfortunately, kind of WorldPoint is no longer around. Did it get acquired, or what happened to it?
No, so they're in a .com bust. We were the multilingual component, so we lost a huge percentage of our revenue really quickly after we were not considered core to most of the company's missions, and so it was easy for us to get dropped. And so we didn't have a plan B. So I had invented all the tech, and one of the things I didn't do was, I guess, prepare the company for the next transition of products to transition and pivot when needed. And so I wasn't there. So it was definitely, we had our products and it would have worked had the market not changed. But, it's one of my big mistakes there was not diversifying enough.
Well, another kind of notable thing for the viewers here is while you're at UH, you met your wife.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm grateful
And-
she's still with me.
Allison, yeah. But that was actually kind of an interesting story you shared where you met and then you kind of reconnected later on. But,
Yeah, that's sort of how most magic happens, right? So we met, dated, then she kicked me out, and then we met again later, and then the magic was actually better at that point. So
okay.
yeah, she's amazing.
So post Peace Corps. So
Mhm.
I think you went to Europe for Peace Corps, is that correct?
Yeah, I did Russia. So I went to Russia to teach, taught engineering there. And then also I started a company there too. It's interesting, my second year, the company I started with my students to teach them, like, you guys want to do it? Let's do it for real. We had our first customer from Hawaii. And I was like, holy moly, this is pretty cool. Like coming full circle, like this native Hawaiian dude in Russia in the boonies, starting a company, then eventually growing it fast enough that the customer base included Hawaii. So that was really
Wow.
nice.
What was the core product or service on that one?
So that one was a tool to help you learn Russian. I was learning Russian and figured out, like, I speak Pidgin, so I can speak Pidgin Russian pretty good. I don't have to conjugate, but you're supposed to be doing stuff like that. So I quickly found out there was some gaps in the market. And so my students and I constructed the language tools that were really radically different. So it was just focused on the conjugations of verbs. And so that product was pretty unique, and it grew pretty quickly. So my students made a good chunk of money from that. $10
really?
a pop. We sold the software, including to some people from Hawaii.
Yeah. Okay, so then you came back to home to Hawaii,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
I think you said a loan fund. Is that correct?
Yeah, sticking with half my life I give away. So half my life I have to be in the nonprofit sector. So that's been my rule. So half I do tech startups, and half I sort of look at the nonprofit sector. So jumped into a community loan fund, the only statewide loan fund giving loans to people like out of prison or folks that didn't have access to capital. And so that was great. And then in doing that, then I met some folks and then transitioned to a sort of a tri-native company where it was owned by Native Hawaiians, American Indians, and Alaska Natives. So I ran the good chunk of that, and we grew that to about $66 million in revenue, 500 employees, all native, indigenous. So that was really eye-opening for me. We had production facilities and Hawaiian homelands, but I got to learn about Alaska Native Village corporations and American Indian reservations in person, and so growing that base there. Yeah, so I did a lot since sort of coming back from the Peace Corps. So I did. Those are the community side of things.
Yeah, but if I recall, that was kind of the launching point for your next big endeavor, correct?
Yeah, I think with innovation, you're always thinking, right? So like for me, like if I cook rice, then I need to know, like, how the heck does this rice cooker work? And I'll figure it out, right? So I think for me, everything I look around, I'm in wonder of, in amazement. And so when I was doing like the loan fund, we were doing some lending. When I did sort of the Native Hawaiian, American Indian, Alaska Native, I started doing a lot of community stuff. And then I had this epiphany, and I woke up one morning, I was like, wow, this is an interesting idea. There's no service where someone can organize the general public into raising money for a specific purpose, whether, pre-purchasing something. So today we call that crowdfunding. And so I started Googling, like, who's doing something like this. And I actually couldn't find any single company doing that. And it blew me away. So I thought right then and there, I got to start this. So I started what we think is the world's first like commercial crowdfunding company. So launched that in 2003 or so here.
So Chipin,
Yeah, we were the first. Yeah.
I'd love for you to share, the early stages. So you had this idea for
Right.
Chipin. Who did you call? Who did you talk to first? Like, what is that like in terms of other entrepreneurs, and how do they reach out to really validate this?
Yeah, I called Carnett, a good buddy of mine. He one of the smartest guys I know, and so he was like, "I'm in." Yeah, so all right, cool. I got like my like-minded crazy entrepreneur, and then I got to call the smartest tech guy I know. So Kevin Hughes, like if folks that don't know him, is like one of the 6 people in the World Wide Web Hall of Fame. Like, he's absolutely brilliant, invented a lot of core technology. His website was hard coded into the first version of Mosaic. So brilliant guy. So I called him, and, he's a quiet guy. Within 5 minutes, he was like, all right, I'm in. And so we basically get your team together, right? So we had our core team, and then you start making it real. Like the whole thing about entrepreneurship for me is you gotta not overthink it. Like, for example, I didn't realize at the time, but Hawaii Business called and they're like, hey, we want to do a story about you guys' new startup. Like, sure. They put us on the cover before we even wrote one line of code, sharing everything. Like, this is exactly what we're going to do. So, which is fine with me because it's about execution, right? Not about like holding and hoarding your ideas. And so it was really difficult, like creating something brand new that doesn't exist. Like, how do you explain it? So it took us a ton of time to iterate. But we eventually figured it out enough that $100 million of transactions sort of grew to that scale. The company is eventually sold. We pivoted and sold the company. But yeah, pretty proud of the work we did there.
Talk about some of the seed capital that you needed to actually launch that, because I feel like that's one of the biggest challenges most entrepreneurs or folks that have ideas face.
Yeah. So how we launched Chipin, like most of my startups don't need a lot of money because the point of startups is you want to validate the idea. So you want to create that minimal viable product, test it, iterate it. Like that's not expensive. Like if you can't do it yourself, you got the wrong team, right? So we had a small team, we could build it. So we needed a couple $100,000 to get that off the ground. So we ended up calling CommerceNet. So Marty Tenenbaum, Dr. Tenenbaum, professor at Stanford at the time, but he ran CommerceNet, which is the consortium for e-commerce. Like they invented all of e-commerce basically, and this is the industry group. And so we like, what do you think about this, Marty? Like this is our idea, and he loved it enough that he funded the entire seed round. So we were able to stop fundraising for that. We actually we were oversubscribed for our seed round, so we just took CommerceNet's money, and that was all we needed to get it off the ground.
And then tell us about some of the early kind of users.
Yeah, that one, we didn't know really what crowdfunding, the term didn't exist. So we built PowerPoint slides, and we had like 6 guys around, 6 laptops, and we're like, hey, like navigate through, like you're going to be creating an event. You're going to be like inviting people. You're going to like, what's the purpose of it? And so like, that's a strange concept to someone, right? So we remember doing it in PowerPoint. And, folks like Eric Nakagawa, he's pretty well known. He was part of our early crew of testing, and we'd get their feedback, and then we'd like iterate again on PowerPoint and then bring them back and have them do it. And so that was enough for us to get to the point where we kind of knew what we need to build now. Is, if you think you can figure it out yourself, then I think you're fooling yourself. Like very few people are that lucky. And so when you can shorten that transition to getting the feedback, yeah, so that's fantastic. Then we started writing code, right? And then we're like, okay, now this is what we do. And then we test again. So rinse and repeat. Yeah.
Rinse and repeat. But you guys got Hokulea on the first.
Yeah, that was the first one. Yeah, so we were looking at coming out with our first trial. And so, I mean, Nainoa Thompson came down to talk to us. Like, how can you say no? It was pretty amazing. And I think we ended up that the event raised about $40,000, which to us are like, I think there's something here like this. So that might have been the first crowdfunding event that we know of. And so we crowdfunding in a sense that it's online. And so we partnered with like the Honolulu Advertiser at the time before the merger. So they had our widgets on their site. Various bloggers had hosted it as well too. And so that's kind of cool to see that it did work. And then after that, a whole bunch of viral events started coming through.
Like the BYU one?
Yeah, that was the first big one, I think, where some students said they weren't cool with Dick Cheney being their graduation speaker. So they're like, we're going to crowdfund our way to our alternative commencement at Denny's. And so they needed $200. And so they set up this joke of a crowdfunding event. And I think in a couple of days, they had 20-something thousand in their account. So they really resonated with the general population of like, yeah, let's fund this. So a whole bunch of folks came out for their graduations. So that was like the first true, like, we don't know those guys. They found it and they were able to use the platform without us like providing any support, like 100% self-service. And so that told us like, there's a thing here. There's a market here. Like, this is for real.
So you should kind of fast forward now, and you're at a point where you decide again, like WorldPoint, that it's time to leave. Talk to us about that time.
Yeah, that was a difficult one. So my second son was born, and I do know that I work so much that, you know, there's a point where you've got to balance the time you spend with your family and the time you spend, you know, building something. And so it was a good personal time to consider that. And it was also a time where we had struggled to monetize crowdfunding. Like, we were doing great. Like, I think we were the biggest in the world at the time for crowdfunding, but we weren't making money on that. So we didn't figure that part out. And so we had to figure out, like, what are we going to do? So we decided to pivot. So we pivoted to building. So we had created these great tools to allow you to build these crowdfunding widgets without any lines of codes. And so that was where we pivoted into. And so I talked to my partners and I'm like, yeah, I've got to tap out, but I think I gave 7 months of my time. So it wasn't like I tapped out next week. So the last thing I did was I built that platform with Kevin. So Kevin and I and Matthew, this other engineer, three of us like cranked it out and made it work. And then that was the sort of a little pivot that we did. And then we transitioned out of the crowdfunding. So we weren't smart enough to figure out how to make money from that.
Well, clearly the GoFundMe's of the world figured that out later on, but you guys definitely paved the way.
Yeah, it was nice to get recognition from some of those bigger guys. I like, this is where it all started. So.
Well, mucho kudos to you folks. Okay, so WorldPoint's in the past, Chipin's in the past, and then you decide to come back and do more of an impact thing with Kanu Hawaii.
Yeah, so back to the sort of nonprofit world. So we launched Kanu Hawaii, which we grew from 0 to 20,000 members, food, energy, waste, civic engagement. So we figured out early on like how to get thousands of people to take action and ladder up their action. So we really spent time like thinking it through, testing, retesting, rinse, repeat, so to speak. And then we don't tell this part of the story, but we ended up selling the software we created to a lot of other organizations like TED.com, the video guys. They bought it. And we were the first guys to build TED's community platform. And so it was hosted in Hawaii, built there. So that's kind of cool. Points of Light Institute, AmeriCorps. So there's a bunch of folks, Jack Johnson, we did some stuff on his site. And the whole point of how do you get people to make these small commitments that then ladder up to bigger actions was something we'd figured out. We got on the front page of CNN for getting Hawaii off the list of like the worst to vote. Like we were number 50 in the country for civic engagement. We got to 49 by like putting an army out to get folks to register, but not just register, but to get educated on how to vote responsibly and like choose people based on things that are important to you. So yeah, a lot of fun sort of getting involved with, trying to hack the civic engagement side of things with innovation.
Yeah. And then did that evolve into Purple Maya?
No. Purple Maya was my friend Donovan Kealoha and I. He and I were. I don't drink. I was drinking Old Duels. He was drinking whatever he was drinking, and we're lamenting about like how bad it was of a desert in Hawaii for learning computer science, which to us was a really good gateway to engineering. And then we asked some friends, and it turned out at that time there were 3 public high schools in the entire state that taught anything other than a first year computer science class. It was shocking to us, and so we're like, that's not right. So we decided to start Purple Maya, and now it's possibly one of the largest sort of tech STEM organizations in the state.
And okay, so going back to that critical thinking skills that was lacking because of, as you kind of alluded to, computer science.
Mhm.
What was the kind of the Linchpin project that Purple Maya kind of leveraged and pushed around for the students?
Linchpin or starting one. So, well, actually, maybe one step before that. Why we like computer science is it's the only industry I know of. You can go to work and tell your friends, like, or your boss, like, dude, I just screwed up for like 1 week. I'm gonna spend the next 2 days like fixing my mistakes. And they're like, yeah, cool. You need any help? Like, there's nothing negative. And the reason being is that in that industry, mistakes are called bugs. You're like, oh yeah, I got a bug to fix, and it's just a bug. Everybody, no one's perfect, so go and fix it. And so we wanted our kids to be immersed in that type of sort of space where it's okay to screw up. Like, in fact, the quicker you screw up, the better it is, because no one's like perfect. So if you fail quickly, and so computer science was that. And so we decided our first class was Minecraft. Like, Minecraft was popular at the time, but not just to play it, but to modify it. Like, how can we get into the code base and hack it? And so that we can make it do what you want it to do. And so we focus on some culturally appropriate things, but kind of teaching the kids sort of that piece of it. So you can go from a user to a maker. And so like that was the big gap. So most of our programs are about that, like teaching kids that, the world is malleable around you. So if you want to measure the water levels of your lo'i remotely, sure, we can help you do that. You want to find the opeapea, the bats, and where they live, let's go build sensors. So we did that with some middle school kids, building sensors that can listen for the bats and then figure out and map them and stuff like that. Like, the world is open 100%. So those are some of the things, but it's grown beyond just education. So we have an entrepreneurship program. So over 50 companies have gone through our program, awarded over $250,000 in funding where there's like no strings attached. We now have an adult ed program where in 12 weeks, we have almost 100% success rate in getting you into a tech job with no tech experience. And we have some graduates that have started with almost no experience that are earning 6 figures after 12 weeks. And so we're really proud about some of these things that we're kind of figuring out. So
Big mahalo to Jarrett Middle School for taking a bet on you folks back in the day. Right?
Oh yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, they were pretty awesome. We couldn't get into the DOE, but there was an after school program that we kind of snuck in. Yeah, thank goodness the DOE doesn't let people in like us right away, right? You got to prove yourself. But that's an entrepreneur, right? We thought we'd get into a classroom, but we couldn't. So yeah, we can get into an after classroom. So
Yeah. I want to start transitioning out to allow for Q&A time here. And I would love for you to share, some of how you validated your early ideas. Because, again, being a serial entrepreneur like yourself, you've got so many things, I feel like a lot of the components around, Asperger's too, it's like you're always hungry for different things, but how do you go for that, in terms of which one you actually spend time on?
yeah, it's got to be passion based. Like, my current company is in clean energy. Excuse me. And so I started off, I'm really passionate about, for 20 years, I haven't driven a gas car. I made that commitment. 15 years, my home has been producing power, not just consuming power. So I'm all in on that. So I've been doing some crazy things on the energy front. But I also, I sat on the board for the state of Hawaii's Clean Energy Initiative. So we were the governing group that chose to go to 100% renewable first before any other state. And then my vantage point from there was like, my passion is energy. But then when I saw the policy of harm to communities that don't have a lot of resources, renters, multifamily, like nothing was available to these communities at scale. And so, those are the kinds of things like, okay, now I know what I want to do. I want to solve for that. And so I kind of figure out the problem I want to solve for, and then I kind of go in open-minded. Like, I didn't realize that water heaters was the initial way to solve that, was to enroll their water heaters and turn it into a battery. So you figure that out by working with families. And I worked with almost 1,000 families before we came up with the idea of shifted energy.
if you were to summarize all of the decades of kind of entrepreneurial projects you've worked on, can you share with us some of your ahas, your lessons learned?
Yeah, I think the first one is sort of an observation. So I know a lot of entrepreneurs that they get bummed all the time. And that's because, like, an entrepreneur, if you don't have a million problems to solve a day, then you're in the wrong business, because it's going to be too easy. Someone else is going to be beating you, right? So if it's not hard, then you're not really solving or creating much, because it's probably already done. Or so it's a very difficult task. And so that perspective change, where every problem is like a puzzle and a gift, I think has been something that's natural for me. So like I get stoked, like, oh, like when we started Chip-In, like I know a lot of the bank executives here, and I was telling them my concept. I thought they would all be like, sure, yeah, let's jump in. Not a single local bank said yes, not one. And so I was like, all right, I guess I'll go to the continent. So the first continental bank I pitched, they were like, yeah, we're in. Yeah. So it was, just those kinds of things, you can't get them to like bum you out, right? So I think that's one observation. I think also too, I've now created tech in multiple different industries that are radically different, and sold them all to like Fortune 500 companies. And so that observation has led me to experience, and money is not really the prerequisite for starting these companies. In fact, it might be harmful in some ways because experience that you have may not be what the market really needs. And so that may not be like a really nice correlation. And so I think, money and experience might be a little bit overrated from my perspective. Let's see. Yeah, I think those are a couple
Yeah,
observations.
we hear that a lot in the kind of the ecosystem here, where there's not enough funding, there's not enough money here. But you're right. If you look at it as a challenge, as a thing, it's like, okay, you got to get through it. Because I think one of the big things that you and I both talk about a lot around it is kind of the Asian culture in Hawaii. We talk about that, especially, shame, really, fear of failure.
Yeah, I had a cold a couple of days ago, so I apologize. Yeah, shame is tough. Like, I would never want to live in Silicon Valley, but because I'm not compatible with the culture, I think, for like raising kids there. But what is cool about there is, like, I remember talking to this guy. We were three of us having pizza, and like one guy's talking about this huge company started and it totally failed and everybody went bankrupt. And the other guy was like absolutely fascinated, like, wow, we got to start something together. Like, he saw that as like really cool experience that they can build on. And I know that here I've had similar conversation with people that might be embarrassed, like, oh, I went bankrupt, or I failed, and that's something that brings shame to me or my family. And that's it's not harmful, but it retards certain kinds of economic growth. And so being more free from that, being allowed to have some space for that, is something that is really important. And I love our local culture, but it does come with some of those constraints, right? So at scale, we do have shame.
Yeah. Okay. Last question. And I really appreciate you sharing this is, along with the whole shame, along with the whole mental health, along with trying to work with, different components of your career, like Asperger's, et cetera. But how do you, Olin, Lagon, keep yourself balanced?
Yeah. Every day I learn every single day. I've got 2-3 books going at the same time, a dozen podcasts that I'm committed to. And I've never owned an HD TV in my life, right? So the biggest TV my kids have is like a little tiny one. So we're more of a sort of, I guess, experiential family. And so I think the thing that keeps me sane is just like figuring things out every single day. That's new for me. I tinker a lot in my garage, and so like I love working with families that don't have a lot of resources. So like one passion project is I'll take all these recycled laptop batteries that are broken, and I'll strip them up and find the good sales, recycle them, repack them into larger packs, and donate them to families that might be living on the street that need to charge a phone or have a light for a kid to read. And so things like that then kind of keep me sane. And then I have a family, so that's really awesome. My 2 boys, Noah and I broke my ear again with him because he takes me to the Big Shore break and we take pictures and get pounded. And so I've got 2 boys and a wife that you know I can I'm fortunate to have, and so I think that the thing that keeps me sane is just try to find that balance. Like it's not easy. I haven't figured it out. Like I've definitely not figured it out. But I feel like I've been very fortunate to have a lot of options.
Well, we really appreciate you and we appreciate your time and sharing with us. And I'm going to switch over to Q&A. I think
Okay.
one of the things we've learned is there's lots of folks out there that would love to, you know, ask you really hard questions or whatever. But so if there's folks out in there that would love to raise your hand, unmute. I'm going to ask Ian and Tim to help me on corralling who has a question or not. Okay, I've got Wiley.
Hi.
Unmute, please. Hi.
I'll put the camera on. Sorry, I'm taking care of our baby right now. But I just had a quick question. How do you, I started a nonprofit, and how exactly do you ask for help? That is something that you mentioned, you know, you would call up a friend who knows, you know, about engineering or technology. Like, how do you ask for help? And how do you ask for help with people that you haven't met before? Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the excuse me, the answer is to just be fearless. Like I've had lunches with U.S. senators and CEOs of companies that they don't know who I am, but I asked, and I had specific reason to reach out, and so I've it comes natural for me. But I think, you know, Wyoli, it's important to, like, if you started your nonprofit and you know what you want to solve for, like if you don't have the answers or the team, then yeah, you've got to go out there and reach out to folks. The thing that's on you though is the ability to communicate like clearly what you need, or like to inspire people as well too, because you know people love to help when they're asked directly, when they're inspired by you and stuff like that. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to hear like what you're trying to do, and I'm happy to reach out to my network to see what I can do to help.
Okay, great. Thank you. I will.
But no be shame. You just got to go for
I'm
it.
not. I'm definitely fearless. I'll contact you. Thank you.
I think our next hand was Jackie Hoover, unless Jackie, you're good.
Aloha, Vincent. Aloha, thank
Hey.
you. This is a wonderful talk. So we're in the process of updating our statewide and respective counties' comprehensive economic development strategy. And I'm hearing over and over again the lack of skills that we have, the lack of skilled workforce. And it seems that people feel that we have to depend on others from outside to bring innovation to us. And I know that's something that Vincent and his colleagues work very diligently on. And how do we change that narrative? Do you have any hints on how to change that narrative? Because what I'm finding is with all the cascading impacts of COVID on the economy and so forth, a lot of people are just giving up. You know, they're saying we don't have enough workers, we don't have enough this. It's become very, rather than being assets-based, it's deficiency-based narrative going through the community. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, you know, I may not be the right person that, like, for example, my clean energy company, we're Hawaii-based, invented everything here, but we're now in 4 countries and 8 states and growing. And so we're exporting our stuff here. All of my companies export Hawaii technology. And so I've never seen a problem with that. There's also the recognition that the companies that hire folks, like we have certain kinds of companies here that make sense to be based in Hawaii. And so, you know, they need a certain kind of workforce too. And so like at Purple Mile, what we're trying to do is trying to identify different opportunities. Like we identified the one that we have right now for adult training. We have another one identified. I think will even make more exportability of our talent here. And so, yeah, I don't know if I got an answer for you because I'm a very positive person. I think we totally can. We can totally do it here. And I'm happy to take a question offline from you if you wanted to talk.
Oh, that would be great because That would be really great, because one of the things that I see as a challenge in helping to pivot that narrative is people forget how seismically, it was a seismic change when we went from an agrarian to an industrial economy. And now we're right at that cusp of really recognizing we're going to go from industrial to information-based economy. And I just
Right.
feel, I had the privilege of being on the Energy Council myself, and I just feel like we have so much expertise here that we could really share and export. So I would love to talk with you offline if you don't mind.
Part of it too is like, we ran these Eat Local challenges. We invented them to like go out at scale and get our members at Kanu to like 100% eat local and buy local. Because part of it too is like, if you look at your own credit card, like we got to take our own Kuliano, like where are you spending your money? Like we vote with our pocketbooks and it makes a difference. Why is it that we import all of our potatoes, our russet potatoes, and we export our amazing uala? I mean, the
Right.
sweet potato here is like lower glycemic index. It's healthier for us, but we sell it. We buy this russet potato. It's made at scale. So part of the problem is us as consumers too. Like we're terrible consumers if our goal is to like really make this place the most like sustainable, locally independent place. So I don't think we're voting the way we should be with our pocketbooks. And it takes all of us to really make those harder decisions.
Thank you very much. I look forward to talking to you offline.
Sounds good.
Frederick, you have a question?
Yep. Thank you so much, Vincent, for moderating this talk, and I really appreciate all your time and this effort as well. And the question that I had, I should back a little bit. My name is Frederick, and I'm currently a sophomore at the University of Hawaii. And I'm really interested in hearing about all your talks about taking these companies that are Hawaii-based into the mainland and into other countries as well, into more diverse markets. And I wanted to ask what specific troubles you might have had transitioning from Hawaii to other markets and how you really got over them.
Let's see.
That's for our next talk, right? Yeah, our next talk story.
Like this morning, I was on a biz dev call with some new customers in Canada. We've got a bunch of customers in Canada when we're expanding that region. And, it's just like talking to some company in Kaka'ako. It's like, they got this problem, we have a solution, and we'll kind of figure out how to do that. I think where it can be enhanced is if you're really smart about leveraging policy or tax benefits or certain regional benefits. Like I'm not, so we just go and compete head to head RFP base. But sorry, I don't know if I have a clear solution there, but I don't think of selling to someone in Canada very different than selling to someone in Kaka'ako. Like it's a company that needs something, and we're trying to deliver the best service we can for them.
I think that's the great answer, because especially if from my perspective, it's like you're not trying to really appeal to the geographic area, you're appealing to the people that need it. And in that sense, if the people need it, they'll need your services. So I think in that sense, that's a great point, and that's something that I'll take with me. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, be as crazy as possible to be customer centric. Like don't be egotistical about what you think, or just like 100% customer driven. And I think you can't go wrong. You'll at least end up with something that the customer wants.
Yeah, hashtag human-centered design, right? Oh man. Got a question from Ian. So Olin, when do you know when to leave?
Good question. I think was twofold, right? So the best solution would be when it's right for me and my soul, and it's right for the organization. And so when those two things collide, so one thing is I'm pretty comfortable. I know I can lead a big company. I know I'm more than happy to do that if that's the best thing. But I know I have a skill set that is pretty rare. That is like to take some crazy concept and build it myself. I have enough of a diverse engineering skill set that I can build almost anything. And so I think recognizing that it becomes important to know that that is where there's a shortage of some skill sets. And so I feel like, when it gets to a point where others can take over from me, then I'm happy to jump back in and go figure something else out. Like during the pandemic, right, in 2020, we didn't have ventilators in Hawaii. We had like a few. And so a couple friends and I are like, let's go invent some and build it and get them out to hospitals. And we designed one in 4 months, working 7 days a week, all the way to like 2 in the morning, and hand built a whole bunch of them, right? So that there's that kind of responsiveness, I think is important too. So I guess, that skill set is important. So I don't want to like lead a big company if I can then do that again for to solve another problem. Good question though.
Got a follow-on question from Evan. He's talking about the emotional attachment to leaving the company. Talk to us about that.
I have Asperger's, and I laugh, but it's like, if I'm driving in the North Shore with my wife and she says like, it's kind of hot, like, you think it's a good idea to get shave ice? And I hear a question, right? So like, no, because I'm answering the question, but that wasn't a question, right? So if she gets upset, then I get confused, like, wow, what just happened? And so I don't have, unfortunately, that's my challenge. Like, I don't have emotional intelligence where I can really see what people are thinking and feeling. And so, but the good news is that then I don't get emotionally attached to like needing to leave. If it's the right time, it's the right time. I mean, very few entrepreneurs can take a company from a small one to a really large one. Very, very few. And so it's also recognizing that I'm not one of those few, right? So it's a pretty humble perspective.
Caitlin has a question. Do you have any advice for people considering becoming an entrepreneur? What's the first step? Well,
the first
clearly
step
showing
is-
up to things like this.
Yeah. Yeah, you just do something, right? Like, start today. Like, you can start a business today. Like, go put an ad on Craigslist saying this is what you're selling. Is anybody wanting to buy? I mean, just you've got to get to the point where you have something to offer that's based on real feedback from customers. And so I know that's my advice is like, you got to be passionate about it, and you want to solve a problem. But starting a business is really about getting to what that right solution is. Like I came up with the concept of crowdfunding, but I didn't know what it looked like, right? So how do you actually do that? And I wasn't smart enough to figure that out. So it's like, getting these people together that can give you that insight that you needed to build something. But yeah, just go for it. Have some fun. Give yourself a budget, $150. Start any kind of business and just go for it. Right?
Yeah.
That's what I did in Russia. My students, I put $50 down for a bunch of teams. I'm like, hey, you guys start a bunch of businesses. And one of them took off, went to that verb conjugation software from my $50 seed money. So I didn't get it back, by the way, but they made a good chunk of money from that. So that was really nice.
I'm curious to see if any of them are Russian oligarchs, selling their tech startups by now. But Melanie has a question. Melanie's a student. She's curious to see if there are any specific skill sets you look for when hiring employees for tech startups. It's a good question.
Yeah, so there's 2 phases to this, right? So the startup phase requires no more than 4 people. Like, if you have more than 4 people, it's hard to coordinate. So that's the good size that I like when I want to build something to test it out and get it to a proof of concept. And once you get beyond that, then you have to be super specific on what the market now needs. Like, for example, when we started Chipin, we needed some very specific financial software engineering. We tried to find it locally, we couldn't. So we found someone in Seattle. And so we moved him from Seattle to Honolulu so that he could be there to build that piece that we needed but we were very specific on what we needed. Interviewed people. Most of the technical people we give exams to, we give them a test. And so, because I don't believe in resumes or cover letters, it's like, well, here's the test, right? So write this kind of code. And then we want us to look at the code, see how they think or she thinks, and we end up going from there. But I think the other broader opportunity is like, you as an entrepreneur, I think should learn so many different skill sets, like learn how to code, learn how to do a little bit of wiring, learn a little bit of mechanical stuff. Like, the more technical you can be, the more valuable you are at iterating quickly. So I've learned a bunch of mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, software engineering, like, so whatever it takes to get something off the ground.
Was that in your book, Wisdom of Our Fathers, that you mentioned?
That book was a cool book. It's a sports writer. He asked folks, like, tell me stories about your parents and that you like. He got 500,000 or so stories. He read them all over a couple of years, and he wrote this book kind of summarizing that. But what blew me away was his intro. He said, I read these 500,000, and there are 2 things that stood out. One is not a single story was based on anything materialistic, which is kind of cool, right? So none of these stories that these people remember about their parents were based on money. But two, more importantly, he said he doesn't think half of these stories would be remembered by their parents. Kind of like my big brother Dave calling me about the hail. If I met him today, I don't know if he'd remember that. It would change my life, but it was such a fleeting moment for him. And so like that is a really good perspective on what matters, right?
Yeah, experiences. Aisha has a question. So you mentioned earlier about being an entrepreneur meant being patient with growth and development. How do you stay motivated to continue tackling such large scale problems?
I'm 50 years old, right? So I've been doing this for a while. How do I stay motivated? I think that's my Asperger's, and every morning I wake up, I'm kind of jet lagged today, but I wake up and the whole world is totally fresh. Like, holy crap, I get another day and I get to figure everything out. And so that's my superpower. I'm really blessed by that. So that motivation is sort of genetic in me. It's problematic. Like, if I have an argument with my wife the night before, and then I wake up and I'm like Superman fresh, and she's like, well, what about last night? I have no memory of that, right? So that there's some challenges to that too. So it's not like all good. But I think I've got that built in where it's really awesome to just keep on solving big problems. I don't know how to teach it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough one, which is why, my personal feeling around entrepreneurship is really focusing on mental health. If we focus too much on the shame of failure of the first business, we lose sight of the fact that, we are all entrepreneurs deep inside. And there's a lot of other questions on the chat, so I'm going to kind of keep it a high-level overview. But for those of you trying to navigate the lows over the highs, Brene Brown, just watch Brene Brown. She's amazing. Her TEDx, Tony Robbins has got some great stuff too to really kind of get your mind set and out of it. I remember watching that when we were in Blue Startups, like over and over and over again, just to kind of boost yourself up there. But there's so many other components of there too, which you'll start unlocking. Sue Johnson's another great one, emotionally focused therapy. But yeah, that's kind of what we're really trying to do here with Confessions of us Serial Entrepreneurs, to share these ahas. So I really appreciate these questions. Okay, so Luke's got a question. Does location affect the way someone can expand the company? Oh no, sorry, Luke, you already asked that one. Okay, Kim's got a good one. How can one determine if their mission is viable?
Good question. How can you determine if it's viable? Yeah, I think economic viability comes after technical viability for me. So I'll first look if I can solve it technically, because at the end of the day, economies of scale always get you to a lower cost point. And so to me, the most important is technical viability. So that's where I have some expertise, like I can figure it out. And then whether it's economically viable, you have to get to know some numbers. Like if you're not really good at a spreadsheet, take some classes, jump in there. And so, doing the math, figuring out what your margins are, getting those calculations together, you got to put that onto paper and kind of figure it out. To me, though, that is secondary to technical feasibility, because I know that I can get a team to help drive that down. Like that may not be my expertise to bring the cost down. Like with shifted energy, like each generation, it gets cheaper. Like our first product was $400 or so for the hardware and $10 a month for the software. And then, now we're like a third of that price. So there's definitely a march towards that economic viability. But part of that is that customer discovery process, right? Talking story with your customers and figuring it out.
Yeah, it's all about discovery process. And I think one of the things you said early on, which is something that's hold true, is if you have a great idea, you got to share it. You can't keep it close to your chest, because there's lots of great ideas. It really comes down to, do you have that passion, drive? And I think Olin is definitely someone on the serial entrepreneur, on the social impact side of things, that kind of exemplifies how you put passion and connect those two in terms of what is the future of what we call conscious capitalism. We've got time for maybe one or two more. Okay, Norman here has a question. He applauds. He says, your story is very interesting and inspiring. Throughout your career, what has been your biggest inspiration?
Biggest inspiration. I think my mom, just a single mom, Hawaiian woman, just I hated her growing up. Like, she only went to the 6th grade and I struggled and why she was so poor and why we had to live in public housing. But the entire time she was consistent about living lightly. She never owned a TV or car or almost anything electronic. We always took the bus. She was very kind and generous and it always took me out to volunteer at things. And so I think it's not what she said, but what she did that has completely changed my life. So to me, I think it's my mom.
That's very inspiring. We're going to wrap things up, folks, because we are out of time, but I wanted to share one comment from Kyle. And I'm reading it from the chat. I never thought about being an entrepreneur, but after this talk, I think one day in my life, I might want to do a startup. So that's
Go for it,
great,
Kyle. Maybe you and I might
Yeah.
start something.
Hey, yeah, you're going to lead the world, Kyle. We're going to work for you one day. So please do. Oh, wait, can you do a startup while still an employee at a different company, or would I need to leave? Good question.
Yeah, it really depends on the company. I would honestly ask your current company, let them know what you're doing. And sometimes that might be cool. Sometimes it's not. If it's not in a competing way, then like I have some overlaps where I just have these conversations with my, like when I came up with the crowdfunding idea, I was running that sort of tri-native company and I talked to my board. I was like, I got this idea. It's so good. I got to do it. And they were like, we agree, but we can't have you do that and this, so you have to transition out. So that was their request. So then I transitioned out. And so that, if you have those conversations, then you can do it the right way.
Or if you're at the University of Hawaii, Kyle, or a student, you can do lots of really great stuff, which is why you should come and learn here.
UH rocks.
Okay, yeah, UH rocks. Okay, we got one more thing, and Lauren was persistent, so she messaged me twice. And Lauren, if you really want to learn more about this stuff, especially on the funding side, I think that's a lot of what folks ask about where they can get access to capital. And obviously, Olin has a great community of folks that he's built a relationship and trust over the many decades. So how have you found grants or angel investment startup capital, especially if you're developing software or tech product that you can't sell right away? So she's looked at SBA loans, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm gonna plug that for the next sessions that we have and talk about that specifically, because as Olin alluded to, crowdfunding is a great one, depending on what industry you want to focus on, your service or product. There's a lot of other things too. If you're in the tech side of things, SIBRs and SITRs, Small Business Innovation Research, or STTRs, those are great too. So feel free to reach out to us. Feel free to come to the dual use third Wednesday meetings for all of you, open invitation. And again, I'm going to show up some of the kind of upcoming things real quick. But for those of you who enjoyed today, please reach out to us, sign up on Eventbrite, follow our social media. There's a little QR code right there. You can join our every third Wednesday, Dual Use Hawaii. You've got the OG, the original kind of folks that are really trying to move the Hawaii ecosystem here too. A huge shout out to Olin. Can't appreciate you more, brother. And again, to
my email, I put my email in the chat there.
Okay. You are too humble and too kind. And again, big thank you to our kind of supporting partnership organizations, Hawaii Technology Development Corporation, obviously Dual Use Hawaii for hosting us, PACE at Scheidler, and Richardson Law School. So again, my name is Vincent Kimura. I'm with the Office of Innovation Commercialization, and mahalo so much for joining us.
Hello, it's everyone, and have a great afternoon from the dual use community.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Vince. Thank you, Olin.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you
and
so
gals.
much. Fantastic.
It was awesome.
See you all next third Wednesday of
Yeah,
every month. Thank you. Thanks, Olin. That was fantastic.
that was so good.
So is this a time to cut off or?